Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mr. Field's online learning class. We'll see how this goes. I do want to just say a couple of things here. I've got at least eight slideshows left, so that should get us pretty close to making a 50-minute video. Just a couple of things to remind you of. We were told as teachers to make um, 10 minutes of instructional time a day. So I asked the principal, can I make a 50-minute video? Here it is. You can choose to do this however you want. If you want to get up at 8 a.m. on Monday morning and watch all 50 minutes of it, you're done with history for the week. If you would rather split it up into two 25-minute slots where you watch 25 minutes of it on Tuesday and 5 minutes of it on Thursday, that's up to you. You could do 10 minutes a day, which is what the school is expecting. Or if you're one of those guys that procrastinates, you can wait until 11 p.m. on Friday night and watch the 50-minute video all the way up until midnight if you want. So it doesn't matter to me how you do it, just so long as you do it by Friday at midnight. I will put the scores in the grade book next weekend. A couple of things I do want to remind you about about these slideshows. I do have three of you that are missing slideshows. I'm still waiting for those to come in. So that would be Leah Johnson, Kaylee Rosenquist, and Nikki Lewis. So I need your three slideshows. And then we are going to I still have to input your Edpuzzle scores from when I was gone. So I will be doing that. If you need to catch up on those Nat Turner videos, I haven't even looked at those yet, but I will start grading them tomorrow. So you might want to finish up any Edpuzzles that you don't have done. Okay, last thing I want to say about this is at the end of each slideshow, we're going to start with Hunter Pogues today. And at the end of each slideshow, there's a multiple choice question that I think I've just really enjoyed these slideshows so much. And your questions across the board are really solid questions. So I think what I'm going to have you do is when we get back next week, and hopefully we'll be back. So we're going to work on the premise that we'll be back December 7th. And what we need to do is share a document, and then each one of you will put your questions on that document, probably with your name and the answer, just so we can know which question goes with which person, and everybody can have the answer to study for. That'll be your study guide for the final exam. I'm going to use these, and I don't know that I'll use all of them, but I will use several of them to build the final exam with. So anyway, with that being said, we'll do that probably on a shared Google Doc when we get back. And then that way everybody can upload their question onto that Google Doc and share with the rest of the class. And then I'd like to try and wrap up whatever we got with the Civil War, because that's the end of our History 101 for Ivy Tech, and you should all get a credit for that. I don't think there's anybody in class that has lower than a B. So well done, honors history class. So that being said, let's go ahead and get you started on these 8 slideshows. And then those people that are missing any extra work, please get that into me. Some of you might have sent the slideshows to me. In fact, I think maybe either Kaylee or Leah sent me a slideshow via email. And if you did, I probably missed it because you're supposed to submit it into Google Classroom. So here's the link on Google Classroom. Let me just bring this up. You should be able to open that up, and it'll look something like this. The 5 W's of investigation, history, and summary. And then you should be able to see a spot where you can insert. Here's the rubric, just in case you need that. And then there should be a spot over here on yours to where you can turn in that slideshow on Google Classroom. So just make sure you do that. And then for anybody that hasn't done those Edpuzzles, just you want to make sure you get those done on that Nat Turner video. I will admit, I did not build the Nat Turner video. I was watching it, and I noticed that the teacher was making commentary on how class was going to be run. They were putting in notes on what would be covered in their class. The Nat Turner story, very controversial story. Slaves gone wild, I guess. If you're put into a position where your family's being broke apart, where you're watching slaves be killed for disobedience or severely beaten, then how are you going to handle that revolt? And so it was some unfortunate events, but I guess stressful times lead to stressful actions. So that's something maybe we can discuss. Anyway, it was a good video. I think maybe to watch from the perspective of the African American slaves pre 1865, and then maybe eventually how more modern African Americans or more modern Americans in general just viewed the perspective of American history through that lens. So that's a very troublesome lens to view American history through. Anyway, let's get back to Hunter's slideshow. So speaking of Nat Turner and abolition, we start to see the country fragment. And so I was listening to some political commentators talk this weekend over about what's going on with the whole election thing. It looks like as time goes on, it's getting more and more difficult for Trump. What's going on? So it looks like there's 4 or 5 different things happening. First, he's having recounts done. Well, they're doing the recounts, and they're not finding that it's changing the races. I mean, it might fluctuate a little bit, like 500 votes here, 1,000 votes there, but it's still not enough to make, when you're winning by 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania, you need more than 500 votes to make a difference, right? So the other thing that's going on is there's a lot of court cases over it. At least the Trump legal team has failed in the courts. They're not providing enough evidence to show that the election's being tampered with. But at the same time, Trump's coming out with a lot of statements, a lot of claims, and different news groups like Fox News and American One Network are kind of defending some of the claims that are being made. And so there's definitely a battle for the Court of Appeals. It does look like we're starting to shift to a Biden transition, and that Biden looks like he's going to be the president elect and be the next president of the United States. However, it still seems like there's a fight going on. So there's kind of the third phase to that is the Court of Appeals. He's trying to fight this out in the media and convince American citizens that he's been done wrong. And then the fourth and final one is that he's trying to get electors to ignore the results and go ahead and nominate him as president. And so in each one of these cases, I would say he's been the most successful in his appeal, maybe in his appeals on Fox News. And then followed up, he's failing in the courts. The courts he's like losing big time in. Then the next area, which is a little bit more gray, is there's been a lot of pressure put on local politicians. And so far, they're still like leaning towards, well, we're going to vote what the people voted, right? And so far, I haven't heard anybody come out and say, yeah, despite the fact that in Pennsylvania, 80,000 people voted for Biden, 80,000 people more voted for Joe Biden, I'm still going to vote for Trump. I haven't heard anybody say that, but there has been like pressure put on local politicians to maybe elect college electoral people that would vote for Trump. And so far, I haven't seen that pan out, but there's pressure that's been put on those groups. So that's kind of where we're at. And so the reason that I'm long-winded about that, and I say that, is I'm coming back here to this slideshow that Hunter's doing. Slavery divides the nation. So is this nation being divided over Trump claiming that there's, fraud in this election? And I say claim. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying claim here because, we still need to see more evidence, I think, before you get courts or politicians on a local level overturning election results. So maybe it's a situation in which his legal team under Rudy Giuliani's having issues, maybe not, but we're facing kind of divisions within our own country, maybe not unsimilar to what kind of divisions are going on here with the North versus the South. And I'm not saying like, civil war, we're heading to a point of civil war, but we're definitely getting kind of two political blocks that seem to really refuse to negotiate with each other or to accept election results or however you want to phrase it. And in this case, the division was over, is slavery right or is it wrong? And so from a purely capitalistic standpoint, whether you're a northern industrialist or a southern plantation owner, slavery is making you very wealthy. Of course it's making you wealthy. You're getting men to work for you for free, and women. But then you have the other side of that argument, which is it morally and ethically right to make people work for free? And so that's what our nation's dividing over back in 1860. And so it was a kind of a long process. And this is, Slavery Divides a Nation by Hunter Peasy. That's a new one. Haven't heard that one before. Now, let's get this changed. All right, who? The Northerners and Southerners. Okay, and there are the two flags. So remember, we had the flag debate at the beginning of the year. Does that represent pro-slavery? And if that's so, is it a prejudice symbol? Okay, so, sorry, got to move my icon around here. Southern politicians, along with a few northern politicians, passed a gag rule, which kept the Congress from speaking of abolition. With that ruling, slavery continued to be, by far, the biggest divide of Americans. It created a bigger difference between the more industrialized North and South, which was based mostly off of agriculture. So here's two nice pictures. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see okay, this is the South. It's agricultural. You have an overseer watching over slaves. Those slaves are working out in the fields of various ages, of both genders. They're picking cotton. That cotton is then sent to the north on the other side, northern factories. Now, here's one argument that I've heard people make about the South. There was a famous book called Time on the Cross, and it argued that Southern slaves were treated better than Northern factory workers. And when we kicked off the school year, we kind of talked about the conditions that Northern factory workers were working in. Now, if you're working for 10 cents a day and you're living in company housing and you're having to pay 5 cents to rent that company house, and then you have 5 cents to live on, is that slave labor? And I mean, some people are arguing, yeah, in some ways that was. So, but still, I mean, I guess you have choices. You can choose to leave that factory. You can choose to go work someplace else. You can choose to opt out of that system, or you can choose to unionize and fight for better working conditions and better wages. The slaves didn't really have any of those choices. And so maybe that was the biggest criticism of that book. But slaves were treated as property. And so just like you wouldn't whip like a horse to death, you really wouldn't want to whip your slave to death, because that would mean you weren't getting the labor out of that slave that you wanted to get. So that was an argument that said, hey, slaves weren't treated all that bad. And that book received a lot of criticism. Okay, so when the gag rule, which kept Congress from talking about abolition, was implemented in 1836. And here's kind of how, I love this map, because this really shows you, you know, which state went which direction. So the states in red were heavy Union states. And then the states in blue are the ones that secede like immediately after, you know, after, I think South Carolina was the first to secede. And they attacked Fort Sumter, and then a bunch of other states joined. And then you have the states that are in like, you know, aqua blue and gray. And the states in gray eventually secede. They were expecting the states in aqua blue to secede, but those were slave states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, that decided to stick with the Union. And in addition to that, Virginia splits into two. That's where we get West Virginia. So this little area in Virginia is almost like a line right here, goes through here. Those were called like the border states, and those were the states that sided with the North, but the South was hoping they would come with them because they had legalized slavery. So where, of course, this affected the whole country. And here is a picture, I think, of slaves with a couple of overseers, at least one overseer. Well, although he looks like he's in a Union uniform. So maybe he's a Union officer that's come in and freed slaves. Why? The South did not want to risk losing their ability to have slaves, so they passed a law in hopes Congress would not change the abolition of the law. So we get a couple of like different dynamics here. So the number of senators for every state is 2. And so you had this kind of, what ends up happening is for every state that enters the Union, we get to this place where if we get more northern states entering the Union, they're going to be abolitionists. So they're going to pass laws to free slaves. If we get more southern states entering that have pro-slavery views, what we're going to end up with is, pro-slave laws being passed. So we get into this situation where we have to have one free state and one slave state always entering at the same time so that we can have an equal number of senators on both sides. And this kind of perpetuates this kind of divide where the southern states start to get entrenched on slavery and the northern states become more and more abolitionist. All right, here is the question. What year was the gag rule passed? I believe it was 1836. Sorry about that. That was my phone.